This happened when I finished 12th grade. After graduation, my classmates and I decided to celebrate in a way we would remember for a long time. We all agreed to celebrate by the shore of a small lake in our town. We found the perfect spot, quiet and secluded so no one else could see our celebration. We set up tents, the girls from our class started making salads, and we guys set up the tents and went into the forest to gather firewood. Mike and John went into the forest to gather firewood for the campfire. When they came back, they told us they had seen some strange things in the woods, animal bones scattered everywhere, a rotten smell in the air, strange symbols carved into the trees, and old rusty traps lying around. We were lucky that neither Mike nor John stepped on any of them. Deep in the forest, they saw some kind of house, possibly a ranger's cabin or a hunter's lodge. We listened to Mike and John's story with surprise and fear, because we had been swimming in that lake and picking berries in that forest since we were kids, and we had never noticed anything strange before. As evening approached, the heat of the day faded. We all sat on blankets and began toasting to our school and our future. We talked about all sorts of topics, and everyone soon forgot about Mike and John's story. By around 10 p.m., many of our classmates were drunk, and conversations turned to personal issues and other topics they usually kept to themselves. Nina and Steve decided to take a walk along the shore. Believe me, there was plenty to do around a lake surrounded by forest. As they walked, they reminisced about various funny stories from their school days. Nina glanced towards the forest and decided she wanted to take a swim. Steve agreed, and they both started swimming. They began to flirt lightly in the water, and everything was going well until Steve's phone rang. He swam to the shore to answer it. While Steve swam to shore and ran to his shorts, he realized the sound wasn't coming from his shorts but from the forest. At first, he thought one of his classmates was playing a prank on him, so he headed into the forest. As he walked, he looked down, recalling Mike and John's story. The ringtone seemed to get farther and farther away until it abruptly stopped, leaving an eerie silence. Steve heard a twig snap behind him and turned around. He likely thought it was Nina following him, but he saw nothing. When he turned back, he was confronted by a towering man, about 7 feet tall, staring at him with bloodshot eyes. The man's face was disfigured. He grabbed Steve by the neck and lifted him off the ground. Steve struggled to break free and call for help, but the monster's grip was so strong that he couldn't make a sound. Tears streamed down Steve's face as he realized he had no chance of survival. But suddenly, from the direction of the lake, someone shouted Steve's name. It was Nina. The man with the disfigured face threw Steve to the ground, and his leg got caught in a trap. Before he could even catch his breath, Steve began screaming in unbearable pain. Nina heard his scream and was paralyzed with fear, unsure whether to run back to camp or towards Steve's screams. Summoning her courage, Nina ran towards Steve's screams. After running about 100 meters, Steve's screams suddenly stopped. She came to an abrupt halt. Her heart pounded so hard from fear that it felt like it might burst out of her chest. She didn't know what to do. It was very dark, and even the moonlight couldn't penetrate through the trees. Suddenly, someone grabbed her by the hair. Nina fell to the ground and started screaming, trying to pry open the hands that had grabbed her hair. The person who grabbed her began dragging her towards the house. He dragged her into the house and threw her onto the floor. Nina cried and begged with all her remaining strength to be let go, saying she had done nothing wrong and was just relaxing at the lake with friends. She had no strength left to escape. The house was very dark, and she couldn't see the face of the person who had dragged her. The air was filled with a terrible smell, making it hard to breathe. He lit a kerosene lamp, and the room was illuminated. As Nina looked around the room, she was horrified. Bones and dead animals were scattered everywhere, and the walls were adorned with what remained of people. He approached her, and she could see his disfigured face, covered in bloody sores. It looked as if someone had cut his face with a rusty knife. Grabbing her by the hair, he pulled her up, set her on her feet, and began sniffing her face. Nina turned her face away, but he grabbed her by the jaw and forced her face back. He started licking her lips. Overcome with revulsion, she began to vomit. He threw her to the ground and started banging her head against the floor. Nina lost consciousness. The man with the disfigured face grabbed an axe and headed into the forest to find Steve. Steve lay there, bleeding profusely. He couldn't call for help, he had no strength left. Hearing someone approaching, he turned his head with great effort and saw the man with the disfigured face coming closer. Steve realized he had only a few minutes left to live. His only wish was for a quick death. The man bent down to the trap and tried to open it, but he couldn't. He then took the axe and began chopping at Steve's leg like it was a tree. Steve screamed in unbearable pain, tears streaming down his face. He begged the man to stop, promising he wouldn't tell anyone, but the man only chopped harder. After severing Steve's leg, the man grabbed him by the arm and dragged him towards the house. Steve's fingers turned blue, his vision blurred, and he lost consciousness. Dragging Steve into the house, the man laid him on a table. He took an iron rod and heated it over the flame of the lamp. The red-hot rod was pressed against Steve's severed leg to stop the bleeding. Steve regained consciousness from the excruciating pain but had no strength left to scream. He emitted some hoarse sounds. Suddenly, sounds could be heard from the forest. Steve and Nina's classmates were looking for them. The man with the disfigured face left the house to hunt his new prey, leaving Nina and Steve behind. The cries of their friends brought Nina back to consciousness. Seeing Steve's bloodied body, she ran to him, tears streaming down her face, not knowing how to help. He looked at her with half-closed eyes, his lips and fingers blue. Nina tried to lift him so he could lean on her and they could escape the house, but the cries of their classmates abruptly stopped. She glanced at the door and heard the crunch of twigs. She realized the man with the disfigured face was returning. Panicking, or perhaps lacking the strength, she dropped Steve and ran to the neighboring room, closing the door behind her. Everything went silent. Nina stepped back 2 paces from the door, but kept her eyes glued to it. At that moment, the man with the disfigured face started breaking down the door with an axe. Nina spotted a small window. She broke the glass and tried to climb out. She almost made it, but the man grabbed her by the leg. He pulled out a knife and slashed her tendons. She kicked him in the face and managed to escape outside. Trying to stand, she felt unbearable pain in her leg. Realizing she couldn't run, she hid behind a tree. Peeking out, she desperately scanned the forest for any sign of her classmates, hoping to call for help. Seeing movement among the trees, she cried out help. In the next instant, a sharp axe embedded itself in her head.